So this is a bit of a replacement webinar for my first class session of the Spring Quarters Management 645 class that had a problem with the recording. In the first class session for most of my classes, I usually go over professional image development and professional development planning. Professional image development is pretty much about LinkedIn to me these days. It's there's more to it than that, but increasingly every function that your resume used to serve in the 20th century world is covered by LinkedIn, and then some. There's certainly some things about professional demeanor and your teamwork abilities and so forth that are also important in your professional image. But if there's one concrete thing that I want all my students to come away from my classes with, it's a competent, valuable professional image on paper, or as it were, electronically online. So with that, I want to go through a kind of a brief summary of what I talk about in greater length in my classes about LinkedIn first, and then about professional development planning. So if I go to slideshow format here, LinkedIn is an incredibly powerful tool. We'll talk about that first in this lecture, and I'll give some examples. I find positioning statements incredibly important, and really more than half the battle in giving the right professional image, and I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that. It's really important, and I think one of the greatest opportunities of your education, whether it's your bachelor's or your MBA or anything else, is doing a degree gives you the chance to work on projects for a substantial amount of time in areas outside of what your current professional qualifications set are. So in many ways, you are, certainly for undergrads and people that are earlier in their career, the things that you do in your classes are actually much more impressive tasks and skills than what you do in your job waiting tables or working as a barista or whatever. So although it's not a paid job, your educational project deliverables, I think, are incredibly important to describe professionally and in some detail in your LinkedIn profile. I talk a little bit in this presentation as well about duties versus accomplishments. Duties is not what you want. What you want is to describe accomplishments with concrete numbers, dollar amounts, numbers of employees, numbers of reports done, percentages of improvement. You want numbers in your descriptions of what you've accomplished in your job, rather than just saying, I was responsible for month-end closing. And then finally, a little bit about the importance of polish and attention to detail. So first of all, the power of LinkedIn. I'm going to jump out of the presentation now and actually go to LinkedIn. So the truly amazing thing about LinkedIn, and this is a phenomenon of all social media more generally, but LinkedIn is the example that I really want to talk about here. The amazing thing is that your information is connected to millions of other people all around the world, and each little piece of information is relationally searchable by search engines and just the social media software itself. So what that ends up doing is that there's really no strangers left on the planet Earth. So it may be the case when you very first start your profile and you only have a couple of connections, but as you build more and more connections, you have a whole lot you sort of get to a tipping point at a certain point where there's really no one that's a stranger to you anymore. So I like to start this lecture always by doing a couple illustrations of searches. So first of all, if we just go to profile, this is in edit mode what my LinkedIn profile looks like. And if we go to view profile as, click on that, this is actually what it looks like to all of you who are connected to me and visit it. But if you go up here to the search window, I always like to sort of call out in class, tell me the name of a company that that you'd like to find somebody at, and I'll type it in. Just challenge me. I challenge you to find a company where I can't find a connection. So I think a recent example was, there was a really good, like, not-for-profit, and I can't remember the name of it now. But let's do Coconut Joe's. I'm curious to see what comes up there. So if we type in Coconut Joe's, you'll notice here that there's people that have a second or a third like next to their name. And if we just go to the left-hand side here and bring this to second connections and third and everyone else, and we keep it to people, you can say here, Joe Coughlin, that's the owner of Coconut Joe's, and you'll see that I am related to him by a third-degree connection. So actually, I'm related to Joe by a first-degree connection. I know him, but we're not connected on LinkedIn right now. But that doesn't really matter because it's just, the world is a small place, and you can see here actually who I'm connected to that is then connected to Joe. So if we click on Joe's profile and scroll down a little bit, you'll see here that I am connected to Julian West, and Julian is connected to someone who is connected to Joe. So one of the most amazing things about LinkedIn is if you get your information out there and you're connected with enough people, they're connected to people, those people are connected to people, and you can find great introductions and networking to almost any business you want to find. So I was trying to find a local business. It was pretty hard to find a connection at. Certainly if we type in a larger company like Era and just hit enter, and we do people, you'll see here 2,406 results for Era. If I just go with the first connections, there's 4 people, Corinna, Traco, Ashley, and Anthony, who are all direct connections of mine that I know at Era. But if I want to go one step beyond that, there's 536 or 532 if we take away the first degree connections, where I'm connected to somebody who is then connected to somebody at Era. So 532 connections at Era is probably enough to be able to sift through, call a couple people, and eventually find somebody who's willing to talk to you about just about anything you wanted to know about Era. So it's one of the most powerful things about this. And just to illustrate, it's not just about company name. If we type in something like, I don't know, C+ programming, I can actually find people. I don't have any first connections that are C+ programmers, but for second degree connections, there's 732 people that I know who know someone who can do C+ programming. So this is one of the reasons why I find it is important to have all of your academic coursework, your project deliverables that you've accomplished in here in LinkedIn, because people can search on them and find you with your skill set, but only if you have it listed. If it's not on LinkedIn, people can't search it by ESP in your brain. So the words and the information have to be in your profile. So I always like to start by doing a bit of a illustration of how powerful LinkedIn is. Going back to the presentation now, positioning statement. Actually, I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint. This PowerPoint kind of summarizes everything, but I can show almost everything by actually staying in LinkedIn. So if we go back to profile, and we look at like viewing my profile as, you'll notice here that there's a summary section where I position myself as an international business development scholar, educator, and consultant with X number of years of experience. If I were not a professor right now in my career and I didn't do consulting work, if I were still in the music business, I probably would characterize myself as a international music licensing specialist and marketing professional with over 20 years of experience. Just this couple of sentences, this short paragraph at the beginning of your profile, goes a long way to pointing people in the right direction of how you want them to see you. So if you consider yourself to be or want to go into the future of being an HR professional, you need to describe yourself at the front as an HR professional, especially if you don't really have a lot of experience in that area right now. If people look and see barista and table waiter, they're not going to think of you as an HR professional. But if you describe it that way and explain that you have, 3+ years of academic project-based experience, then they'll look further down and understand, this person's paying their way through school, but they actually are an HR professional. So very important to have a summary positioning statement there. I believe the next point in the PowerPoint was, educational project deliverables. So if we go back into edit mode of my profile, you'll notice here underneath, looks the same way for everybody when they're editing their profile. Underneath the picture with your name and underneath the place where you have your name, your title, and your picture, there's a bunch of buttons you can push to add content. And if you click on the View More button below that, it'll give you every option you can add. So right now, I don't have any volunteer experience listed. I don't have any patents listed. I don't have any certifications, et cetera, et cetera. For most of you, when you're starting your profile, there will also be a button here for projects. And that is a great, useful tool for describing all of the project work that you've done in your various academic courses. Once you have added a project, in order to add more projects, you have to go down to the projects section of your profile. So if you look here, I've got several projects listed, and at the bottom of that, if I want to add another project, I just click right here. So you'll notice I added a couple of these specifically because they're examples of academic projects that you all might do in some of your courses. So, the projects I had you do in this class are much more like this first one here, runway post-production, of actually helping a small business to either increase revenues or decrease costs. But if you look at some of these other ones, a lot of your coursework that you do at CSUB or in any education basically involves tests and homework assignments. So, I took a Visual Basic Programming course when I did my PhD, and I went back and I looked at the syllabus of that, and I thought, okay, well, how could I describe this as if it were a work project? And, the homework assignments, we basically had 6 homework assignments, and for each of them, I wrote, slightly less than 100 lines of code. I went back and kind of looked at my homework that I had turned in. So if you try to quantify that, I always get that junk mail in my one inbox. I really don't patronize Russian Lady Day, but they keep sending me stuff anyway. Anyway, going back to the VBA here, if you just go back and look at your homework assignments, it could even be, the final that you took. Every course has some kind of test that either has multiple choices or short answers or essays or whatever. You could phrase that by saying, completed final exam project covering 10 major topics of Visual Basic programming in a 100-question timed exam. Achieved a score of 85%. Like, even though all you're really doing is saying you got an 85% on your final, it sounds a lot more practical and useful from a career perspective if you phrase it in that way. So I've given a couple examples here of a VBA class that I took and how to phrase the homework in a way that sounds more professional as a project, and then a statistics course as well that I took. So very important for all of you to add educational project deliverables. Moving on to the next slide here, duties versus accomplishments. So this is a big one that almost everybody I end up marking up and telling you to change this or change that. Like, if you look up here, each and every one of my job descriptions has, I'll give a one-sentence description of what my job is, and then I'll list what amounts to a bullet point list of accomplishments. So each of those accomplishments has some task that accomplished some objective, and there's numbers attached to it. So these are some of them here. If we go back to the slides, you'll look here. This is a profile from one of my students from a couple of classes ago that I use as an example now. This is good. It pretty much describes what he did at Big Five, but it doesn't describe anything that he accomplished. And most employers, most business colleagues out there know what the basic responsibilities of an assistant manager at a sporting goods store are. You don't have to relist them. Just confirm that you did indeed have those responsibilities in one sentence or less, maybe two, and then describe what you accomplished. So if we go to, this is an example from my resume, instead of listing all of the different tasks that I had to do to acquire projects and to scope projects and to manage, I could list 20 different tasks that I did, but really the bottom line is that I generated $100,000 in gross margin. And I set and conducted 300 project scoping meetings, and I achieved this little project success here. People want to hear numbers and accomplishments. They don't want to hear duties. So you need to confirm what your dirty duties were, but one sentence, and then tell people your accomplishments. And then finally, polish and attention to detail. I've just made a few marks here on another student's profile here. Small things, but showcasing. It should be one word. Advancement, struggles, and improvements companies could choose for years to come. There shouldn't be a "the" right there. Advise or help advise on marketing image. Little things, but people read this stuff, and if you have spelling errors or grammatical errors in your profile, they take it seriously. It undermines your professional credibility if you don't meticulously comb through your professional profile, constantly looking for errors. I still find errors in mine, and I have spent the equivalent of weeks and weeks of effort on my LinkedIn profile, but I still find things that could be phrased a little bit tighter, little punctuation errors and so forth, and I encourage all of you to really be meticulous and neurotic about constantly going through and tightening up the language in your professional documents that you put forth as your image as much as you possibly can. So here's an example of one of my descriptions in my own profile that I think doesn't have any errors at this point, but I went through that 5, 6, 10, 20 times until I got exactly the phrasing and exactly the punctuation and so forth that I wanted. So that is the end of my LinkedIn webinar. I was actually going to do a second half of this webinar on professional development planning. It is 9:40 at night. I think I may need to go to sleep soon, so I think I'm going to end up recording the professional development one another day, but at least we can put the LinkedIn profile development lecture here up on the syllabus as a webinar. I think that's probably the most important thing to have listed and available again here. So that's it for this webinar, and soon to come more content. Stay tuned.